welcome back. Here we are again. Today we're going to conclude the William Gaudet interview by Bernard Fensterwald. Now, I'm sure we'll touch on more Gaudet stuff in the future, but for the time being, there's not really a ton of stuff that we can really say about him. CIA employee for 22 years from 47 to 69, right? But over the years, you had two different big interviews of him. You had the FBI interview of him, right, where he's basically lying his ass off. And then you have this interview of him with Fensterwald in 75. This is the more important of the two. It's the longest Gaudet interview there is. He appeared on The Men Who Killed Kennedy or a couple of them shows, but he's really swept under the rug when really he's, can I say he was a direct link to the assassination? No, but can I say he was directly connected with handling some of these Cubans, and therefore he knew all these people down there for sure, definitely. So, but so we're gonna pick up from where we left off yesterday, and tomorrow, let me see. I don't know. When I get done with the show today, I'll go digging through some files and I'll figure out a show for tomorrow. But I'm really enjoying staying here in New Orleans. While everyone understands and knows that New Orleans is the key to the whole thing, the specifics kind of fail us, right? Fortunately, we have Perry Russo and is attending the party where he saw Leon Oswald, right? That's a good behind-the-scenes kind of a piece of data. We're starting to put the pieces together with Martin McAuliffe, right? Who was wrapped up in the mix with David Ferry and all these guys, but seemingly a higher profile. He was a professor, so he kind of maintained a higher profile. Then you got Kent Courtney and Clint Bolton and a bunch of these other guys in New Orleans who were handlers of Kerry Thornley. And we'll get back to all that stuff because that's really what's fascinating me lately. I mean, I really want to understand if we can set aside the connections of the obvious and overt connections of Clay Shaw to CMC and the rest of the assassination, right? If we can put Clay Shaw to the side a little bit and we can see the mechanisms behind the managing of the men in New Orleans, aside from the assassination, which led to the assassination, that's kind of what I'm digging into, right? So I'm really looking for connections to E. Howard Hunt, David Atlee Phillips, right? These guys. Not that I think they were directly connected to the assassination. They were in on the assassination, I'm sure, but these guys are lower level players than people really think. All right, so we're going to continue on this interview from yesterday. Fensterwald says, when he got to jail, the first thing he asked for, though, was an FBI agent, which struck me as odd. Hang on a sec. Who is he talking about here? Oh, he's talking about Oswald and the fight with Bernier on August 9th, right? So, when he got to jail, the first thing he asked for was an FBI agent, which struck me as odd. I didn't know that. When he got to jail, he asked for and had a visit from an FBI agent. I've forgotten which one now. Quigley? Yeah, a fellow named John. Yeah, he was arrested for a civil offense, disturbing the peace was what he was booked on. Well, he requested an FBI man, which was strange, and the FBI man showed up. And then you have ... and something's redacted. He was released very quickly, and this, as I told you this other day, and the record shows that he went over and sought out Dean Andrews as an attorney. He sure didn't pick a good one. I talked to Dean the other day. Is he? He's scared to death. He is. Well, he's been sick for one thing. He's had a heart attack and damn near died, but he's not well at all. He's running for office down in Jefferson Parish now. He's running what? He's running to be a judge in Jefferson Parish. Oh. They may have had the election by now. I don't know. Ah. How well did you know Maurice Gatlin? Gaudet says, off and on over the years. What could you describe him to? And then something is redacted again. I don't know why there's any redactions in this fucking thing. Gaudet says Gatlin was poking his nose into a lot of Latin American stuff at the time. He had some angle. What it was, I never did know. I always was suspicious of Maurice Gatlin. I never fully trusted him in anything. And because I know he can be made certain promises in a couple of Central American countries, which I knew he could not deliver. And I think he tried to get representation up in New Orleans for some of these countries, but never did actually succeed to my knowledge. He didn't. Could he have been working with Guy Bannister? I think Guy Bannister would have picked somebody better than Maurice Gatlin. Well, Gatlin got his comeuppance in Panama because he either committed suicide or somebody helped him jump out of the 14th story of a hotel in Panama. Well, that wouldn't surprise me either. Fensterwald says no. Gaudet replies, he, as I say, he was a man I could never trust and I wouldn't trust, and I shielded away from him as much as I could. He tried to get me involved. He pretended he was a close personal friend of mine and said this to many people in Latin America, and I quickly told him he wasn't a close personal friend of mine. I mean, this happened not only once, but on many occasions, and he was trying to use the fact that he was a friend of mine as a means of trying to get some stuff out of those countries. And it just didn't work. But this whole thing, as it gets, like my paper sent a man over here and spent 3 hours with me. They're doing a piece about me. I don't know when. But I think they are doing it more in my defense than anything else to protect their flanks, because after all, I have represented them over here since they started in 73. Is that the Biloxi paper? Yes. And the executive editor is a close personal friend of mine, and I think they regard me very highly. And so I have been used on several occasions to help the governor on this on things involving Latin America. I helped out on this Honduran relief deal, and another friend of mine was the head of it as a former FBI agent in Buenos Aires during World War II. He's with Gulf National Bank. He's an undercover FBI. He was not official FBI. You see, the FBI had both the official FBI people who were the legal attachés, and the FBI also had their unofficial people who were out in the streets who didn't carry any identification, and who were left with their own devices. Like I was, Paul White, or Wright, was one of these down in Buenos Aires who was left to his own devices to help the FBI. But in case of any problem, the FBI wasn't there to protect him. He was on his own. That's right. Did you know Clark Anderson in Mexico City? I know of him. He was the legal attaché at the time all this happened. I think that trip of Oswald's to Mexico, wasn't that by bus, actually? Yeah, but some strange things happened on that trip. This is Fensterwald talking. For example, there are no pictures of Oswald, at least the one we know, going into either the Cuban or Soviet embassies, although there were cameras taking pictures of people. The CIA did come up, or maybe the FBI came up with pictures of somebody else who claimed to be Lee Harvey Oswald, got his pictures and sent him back to Dallas. Yeah, those pictures were of Saul Sage. We don't know his real name, but that's the code name he goes by. Gaudet says, but they were not of Lee Harvey Oswald. They were of a completely different person. In fact, they were sent to Dallas the afternoon of the assassination. More or less coincidence. And it turns out later that it turned out to be the wrong pictures. Obviously, the man's enormous in the picture. Big man. Ever seen those pictures? They're in the Warren Commission. No, but Harvey Oswald was not a big man. No, but this man was big. 6'4", 6'5". Oswald was a little guy. Yeah, I mean, little puny guy, actually. Were you familiar with the International Travel Agency? Is that the name of the company? It was in the International Trade Mart. I didn't ever use them, so I don't remember them, no. Yeah, they were on the first floor. Hopkins was the head of it. Did you ever know Lewis Nichols was supposed to be the manager? This must be another one then. What about Lewis? Mr. Lewis? Huh? I think it was Lewis Nichols, but it may be Mr. Lewis. Gaudet says, well, the head of the travel agency that I knew in the Trade Mart was owned by a fellow named Hopkins. He was the head of it. Would this have been the one that Clay Shaw would have used? Yes. Do you remember how big it was? How many people worked there? It started off in a little cubbyhole at the entrance, and then it expanded, and it has expanded even more. It's operating now in the new Trade Mart. Very large offices. In that time period, do you remember how big it was? Like 3 people working there or 12 people working there? About 4 or 5, as I recall. No connection with the agency? No, not to my knowledge. Hopkins, of course, was taking an awful lot of trips, so it's quite possible that he did. He could have been, because the CIA, I'll tell you, anytime they found someone they could trust and they could use, would use them. And they made it was pretty well understood that if anything happened to you, the CIA would never know you. And if I got caught on some of the questions that I was asking questions about that they would want to know about that, brought up on suspicion, and I would end up in a booby hatch down there in Central America. I certainly couldn't depend on the CIA to get me out. They would be the last person to get me out. Do you remember Hopkins' first name by any chance? It might be wrong. It might be a different travel agency. Hopkins, I'm sure that's his last name. They were partners, Hopkins and another guy, a dark-complected fellow. Hopkins was a crew-cut guy, was blonde, and the other guy was a dark-haired fellow. Those were the partners. Now that the other partner's name was, I've now forgotten. What did you say, Lewis? I said a man named Lewis Nichols. That could have been him, the partner. I'm not sure. Well, the reason why I'm asking is that when Mr. Shaw traveled, that Lewis Nichols, who, as I understand, ran the travel agency, handled his travel plans for him. Well, it would have been the partner of Hopkins then, and this same man personally handled Oswald's travel arrangements when he went to Russia in 1959. Wow. Wow. All right. Let me pause here. God damn it, I hate lukewarm fucking coffee. Okay, so this is a point of interest here. All right, so Clay Shaw was head of the trademark. Inside the trademark building was a travel agency run by a guy named Hopkins. Hopkins had a partner whose name was possibly Lewis Nichols. We don't know that for sure. But it was this person who sold Oswald his tickets to Russia in 1959. And I'm assuming, when they're talking about Clay Shaw and his travels, I'm assuming this person is responsible for Clay Shaw's travel arrangements to Portland, Oregon, which he was allegedly on a train the days leading up to the assassination, and then supposedly on the train at the assassination. Then he shows up, I think in San Francisco, and then he shows up in Portland, Oregon. If I'm not mistaken. I haven't dug too much into that, but we all know fucking Shaw was in Dallas, okay, with Erwin Hayman of the Jewish Agency in Switzerland. And so I haven't been able to put the pieces together on that, but I know it's true. Because Mr. Dawson said so. And Mr. Dawson is usually correct. Well, if he's not correct, he's bullshitting me, and I can tell when he's bullshitting me. So this piece of information is definitely accurate. Clay Shaw was in Dallas, and I need to fucking prove it. And maybe this guy, Lewis Nichols, may be that point of contact there. Ergo, see if you can find Lewis Nichols anywhere. All right. Good stuff. That's why I was trying to find out, because if obviously this was an agency of 2 or 3 people, this would be not irregular or abnormal for the manager to have to do with the public all the time. If it was a larger agency, obviously the manager would still work with the people who were, where in the world did he get money to go to the Soviet Union? That's a good question, Fensterwald said. Huh? That's a good question. That's one of the things that keeps some of us going. I don't know. He didn't save that sum of money in the Marine Corps. You know good and well. What was his record in the Marine Corps? It wasn't very outstanding. He was a PFC, bad record, but he was an interesting program, known as the U-2 program. Oh. He was a radar operator for the U-2 program. Oh. With a very high security clearance. You're damn right the U-2 was. At the time, it was the hottest thing going. There was another one we tried to lie out of. That's right. But I say if we'd stuck to the original lie, we should never have admitted it. You see, Oswald was stationed over there at the base out at Atsugi, where the flights were coming in and going out of, where Powers came in and out of, a lot of strange things about our friend Lee Harvey Oswald. And that's the only reason, see, the man is so, he doesn't have to. It's obviously he's coming in contact with all these different things all the time. This is why it's not abnormal for anybody to have met Oswald, because this dude shows up in some interesting, obviously he can't be working for everybody, so just because somebody met Lee Harvey Oswald or had anything to do with him, I don't think it means anything at all, Gaudet said. I don't either. I still say that McCord will tell you, and I'm sure that, you mean Hunt? That Hunt is the man who knows actually about who's back of this whole affair more than anybody. You told me that last week. You know, Richard Nixon had that same theory because right after Watergate, when President should have been worrying about Watergate, he was worrying about E. Howard Hunt and the Bay of Pigs and those other things. Right. And I think, and those other things is what we're talking about. Those other things were groups that were very dissident about the fact that Mr. Kennedy let them down. Right. I mean, after all, you've got to remember, the Bay of Pigs really was, that the 1,200 men were marching into their imprisonment or plain slaughter. simply and solely because one man didn't press the button when he was supposed to. And so I can't in my heart find myself hating those Cubans who took that attitude, particularly if it was a brother or a husband or a father or something like that. Could the Cubans involved in this have been some of Castro's people who were doing this in revenge for various attempts on Castro's life? I question the story of Castro's assassinations on Castro's life. I think that's the biggest fabrication that Mr. Castro ever produced. I think he likes to let people think that he's the victim of all these plots, but no. Let me stop right there. I 100% agree with Mr. Gaudet here. I don't believe any of those goddamn attempts on Castro were ever fucking real. Ever. And I've said it before. You think we can't knock off some fucking dinky little island, some fucking dinky little fucking dictator 90 miles off our coast? Go fuck yourself. We took out the entire country of fucking Iraq and Afghanistan in like 3 hours, okay? We could have gone in there and fucking just wiped out the fucking Castro anytime we fucking want. But we never did because he was working for us the whole time as a smuggling partner, okay? Ugh, so frustrating. You think these were anti-Castro people who were mad at Kennedy over the Bay of Pigs? That's right. I think that's what it really was. Really. Do you think the FBI came down and raided some training camps of these Cubans in the summer of '63 in both Lake Pontchartrain and the Ibarra or New Barra broke them up? I know it. Think that could have had something to do with this. That's part of it. They felt they were being really let down completely. Could I get you to just theorize for a moment? Because I have no real, I'm coming at this like I told you before. I don't understand how this works. How possibly could a group of anti-Castro Cubans, how could they have used Oswald in some way? I don't mean to pull the trigger, but I mean, how could they have involved him in this? Where was he vulnerable? Money. I think with money, you could have gotten anything from Oswald. Obviously, that's bullshit. Obviously. Is it inconceivable to you that he could have been approached and won over by a group of... It's not inconceivable at all. In other words, you don't really buy that he was a card-carrying communist necessarily. No, I don't. And when a man is a card-carrying communist, he worries me very little. It's the ones who are not card-carrying communists that worry me the most. And so, well, maybe McCord may blow the lid off on all of this when he gets out. He's making noises in that direction. McCord has got a very slow burn on. He's not supposed to be CIA, is he? Well, he's protecting for the CIA if there's any conceivable way to do it. You see, the problem is, Mr. Gaudet, that it's obvious to me. It's obvious, I think, to Bud, too, who anybody that's in this area at all, you told me that you sort of believed the same thing, that the Warren Commission's report is going to go down the tubes. The official cover story that Lee Harvey Oswald didn't know anybody and Jack Ruby didn't know anybody, and these two people just step out of the darkness and for selfish reasons commit all this crap. Well, there's where we've got to have another story, and we've already been shown that we don't necessarily have to have the truth to be put out as the official version. And it's obvious, but there's something going on, and I think that's what Bud and I are really trying to do, is just find out what happened as opposed to letting people get into this. Obviously, people are going to have to be motivated to get into it, and it seems to us fairly obvious that some of these people are going to be out to try to do in the CIA. What is your radio station trying to do about this? We are in Dallas, and Dallas has lived with this thing for 11 years, and Dallas has been damned from here to Timbuktu. Our station's the only city-owned radio station in the United States. We are municipally owned by the city of Dallas. You're owned by the city? Right. We're doing nothing more or less than trying to make ourselves available, using myself personally in the radio station's facilities to gather information. Once again, we've got no preconceptions on this, but it appears to us that there was more to be found out than what we now know, and it just happens that the management of my station is in a position to turn me loose on this. To some extent, like I said, it's a thing that's just purely curious to me. You see, why I got in on it, Mr. Gaudet, is that I was working with the police for a couple of years. Oh, I see. See, I always heard that if there was a conspiracy, oh my God, the Dallas police were deep in it. I've heard that too, Gaudet said. Turns out to me that the Dallas police are doing their own investigating. See, they got jumped on by the FBI. Oh? See, when they did this original investigation, you had a bunch of Dallas policemen that came up and tape breaks. Did you ever know, and it stops right there, whenever the tape breaks, it seems like the conversation just comes to a fucking halt. Always at good points too, believe it or not. Mr. Stone says, did you ever know Larry Borenstein? Huh? Did you ever know Larry Borenstein? I don't understand that at all. It's such an outright lie. Well, as I said, did you ever know him? No. Borenstein? No, don't even know him. And you never ever heard of Jack Ruby, I guess? No, I never had. You don't think Borenstein was in any way connected with the CIA? I don't think so. Did you ever know an FBI agent by the name of Call, C-I-L-L, in New Orleans? I think so. You did. I think it was Call, C-A-L-L, the man who called on me for information about various Latin American activities. That sounds right. And he would come get my opinion, primarily on that. He was reporting to someone about the information I gave him, because towards the end there, the FBI was, while they will not admit it, but the FBI was trying to get into the Latin American field, and whether this was a move to offset the power of the CIA or not, I don't know. That's interesting. That is interesting. But in looking back now, it would have seemed to me that Mr. Hoover was intensely jealous of the CIA and what it was doing, and was trying to find some sort of way that he could convince Congress that there was no need for a CIA abroad, that the FBI could do the same work, and that I think Call was probably one of the special agents set up to do this kind of work out of New Orleans. This was my opinion, and I'm sure it's the same man you're talking about. Is Alberto Fowler or Fala still around? He was the last of my knowledge. He came from a very prominent Cuban family, as you know. Right, yeah. And he was very close friend of Marie Basquiro, who became head of their Latin American department over at the Trade Mart. And he was a close friend of Mario Bermudez, who was a Colombian who became some official with the International Trade Mart and with the Mayors Association of Latin America. I think Alberto used to work pretty closely with the agency. He did. And Alberto didn't make many trips, though. He was in New Orleans most of the time. His contact would be those Cubans who came here. Right. And this was the way he would be used. And he came from a very prominent family. And you see, there is another one of life's little coincidences, things that happened because the FBI brought it up. They asked if I knew a Cuban man by the name of Jean Desvernin, which was a name out of the blue at the time. Well, I knew Gene fairly intimately when he was in Costa Rica with the embassy, and he was born American but raised in the United States. He was also of Cuban contacts and so forth, and when the war was over, he went with Mario Lazo's law firm in Havana, which was at the time probably the largest law firm in Havana. Which represented more U.S. companies than anybody else. And how Mario ever got out of Cuba is something I'll never know, because of all those Cubans, was the most knowledgeable man of all who was going on in Cuba, and he blames most of this, the problem of Cuba, right smack here where it should be, on Bill Weiland of the State Department and Herbert Matthews of the New York Times. And frankly, I think the guy who stopped John Kennedy from giving the go-ahead was Bill Weiland, because I knew Weiland back in the days when he was in El Salvador, and Bill Weiland at that time was very close identified with the pro-communist element there. And he had many of their leaders at his home. And I called him in on the course of my work. As a matter of fact, he was one of the men that the CIA asked me to check on, which was long before the Kennedy assassination or anything else. And they may have reports somewhere in their files of my evaluation of Bill Weiland. On Bill Weiland? Right, and it's not very good. What was the name of this lawyer you said the FBI asked you about? Eugene Desvernin, Desvernine. What would they ask you about him? Did I know him? What contacts did I have with him? Did they have some suspicions about him? I think mainly because he was attached to Mario Lazo, and Mario Lazo mentions Jean Desvernin in his book on a couple of occasions as being involved with a few things going on in Cuba. And the man was absolutely and completely trilingual, French, English, and Spanish. And how many times did the FBI come to talk to you after this assassination? Well, they came over here twice, to my knowledge. When I was living on 406 Beach. The first initial contact, as I say, was in the Trade Mart when, now they know I'm a CIA. I had CIA connections, and certain things would come up, and they would then, trying to follow these things, though, would come to see me. They first came to the Trade Mart? That's right. Do you know if it was on the 25th or not? I don't know what month, day, or of the year. It was before they came to Waveland, though. Yes. A day or two, a week, shortly, maybe longer. I would say it was less than 2 weeks. They were over here in Waveland. And they came over here on 2 separate occasions. Right. And the same fellow named Miller? No, the one came over here was a different man. Do you remember his name? No, I don't. I saw his proper identification cards, though. Uh-huh. And since he already knew, because he said so, that I had been involved with CIA, this is why he was coming over to see me. This was his excuse. And just now, after you've called me, I've had a call from a man who said he was with the FBI and said he wanted to talk with me and ask me a few questions. That's within the last week. Did he give his identification? I told him that I'd be glad to talk with him if he came over and presented his identification and I could find out and run a check on him. Did he say where he was calling from? No, but he said he'd be over and see me, and he would give me wherewithal so he could be checked on. This was in the last week? Yes. Strange. Gaudet says, I don't know whether the FBI man is now starting to involve me again or not. Sounds like it, doesn't it? It sure smells like it. After the 2 visits back in 64, 63, yeah? Did this upset the agency that you reported to? Did they find this upsetting, or did they say, well, just go ahead and answer his questions? No, they told me not to. Not to. Do you know, was this before or after the Warren Commission got into it? Even after the Warren Commission got into it, the answer for me was not to divulge any of my activities in Latin America. And you didn't? I did not. As a matter of fact, the only person I ever admitted being a CIA agent to was the FBI. Mm-hmm. No one else knew, not even my wife. What does she think now? You said that she wished that you had been on their payroll, and then the tape stops. Well, that's Junior Butler's outfit. Right. What relationship did you have with them? You were sort of in the same business. I was closely related with Butler because of one of the prime sponsors of this in New Orleans was a very close personal friend of mine and an investor in my own company, Dr. Alton Oshner Sr. Oshner was also involved in the Incas, right? The Inca fucking organization that put on the debate with Oswald, right? So I'm going to have to do some heavy digging into Inca. Like, everything I find on Inca comes from fucking newspaper articles. So we might have to do a show where I'm just sitting here reading newspaper articles on Inca. But Alton Oshner was a doctor. He was allegedly involved with all the fucking cancer stuff that all the JFK kooks like to fucking obsess over. I personally don't give 2 fucks about their fucking cancer shit. I don't care if it involved David Ferrier or not. It's got nothing to do with the assassination. No matter how many fucking times people try to connect it, it's ridiculous. I was very closely related with Butler because one of the prime sponsors of this in New Orleans was a very close personal friend of mine and an investor in my own company, Dr. Alton Oshner Sr. And Oshner had a very personal interest in this because he felt that one of the great problems in the United States was lack of knowledge about Latin American affairs, and that's what's the Information Council of the Americas, that's what it stands for. Information Council of the Americas was supposed to do, to try to get out information to the people. Now, they always had a rough sledding getting money, and Junior Butler was primarily the money raiser, and he was also the motivating force behind it. He didn't have much time to do much motivation, though, because of his efforts trying to get money. So that they did make a series of tapes that they sent down below, but to my knowledge, that is about all they did. But that was the information about the United States and Latin America. Yeah, so that was not doing any good up here. And Fensterwald says, well, that was being supported by the agency through a couple of foundations, one of which was in my own hometown. That's how I happened to know about that. Well, they had a funneled through. They had a big banquet down there, a money-raising thing, and at which time prevailed upon Nelson Rockefeller to come down and be one of the speakers, and that's the last time I personally saw Nelson Rockefeller, and I went up and talked to him at the time about old times. Yeah, and I feel quite certain that Nelson Rockefeller Committee will not call me as a witness. Why not? Because Mr. Nelson Rockefeller knows what I know. You don't think they're going to be very enthusiastic about really going into any of this. I don't think Mr. Rockefeller is going to be, no. You can't think that even Mr. Bellin is, who is his staff director because he was one of the counsel of the Warren Commission. Ooh, that's a fucking juicy nugget. Fuck. So you can't think that Mr. Bellin is, who is his staff director, because he was one of the counsel on the Warren Commission. Oh, shit. So Mr. Bellin, a lawyer for the Warren Commission, who was all through my fucking book, I quote him throughout my book, he ends up being Nelson Rockefeller's fucking staff director after the Warren Commission? Fuck. Significant as it fucking gets. You can tell how they picked their lawyers for the fucking Warren Commission. The same people keep showing up. It's a bit strange, isn't it? Well, why should Mr. Rockefeller be the one to take... I don't understand Rockefeller being given the job of investigating the CIA. I mean, I don't either. I mean, my God, anybody with either Gerald Ford is the stupidest man in the United States or he doesn't know anything about Nelson Rockefeller. What would seem very plausible, does it? Or he doesn't want it to be investigated. I mean, if he doesn't want it investigated, I can't think of a better man to have named. How about Grady Durham? Did you ever know him? No. What about a group called Alpha 66? Yeah, in a vague sort of way. I knew a couple of so-called members. Can you remember who they were? No, they were Cubans, though. This was in Miami by chance. They were from Miami. Do you know if Lee Harvey Oswald was ever in Miami? To my personal knowledge, no. Now, what he's asking him really is about the alleged incidents where Oswald gets in a fight at the Miami, at the Bayfront Arena, right? And that's all covered in my book. In case you haven't bought it yet. Just saying. Did you ever have any business in Miami? Very little. Miami was not one of my big places. I used to go there occasionally, but I used to go there, for example, when I was going to take flights to deep South America, when I was going to, say, Chile or Peru or Buenos Aires. You would never have gone to Miami in connection with the CIA? No, it was just an easy way to get rolling south. That's right. Well, I did work for CIA on some of these trips. Yes, I did some reporting for them on these trips. Most of my activities for the CIA and active activity was centered around Central America. But you never reported to anybody in Miami. Huh? Did you ever report to anyone in Miami? No, I reported to only one source. I never had varied on that. I wanted to ask you something that you mentioned the other day. Do you mind if I interrupt? No. Your list goes on forever. My list is, well, I have one thing to say about Mr. Gaudet. You have an incredible memory. You really do. I'm surprised because we're talking about very obscure people. You said that you had gone out and sat outside and watched Oswald do his little act in front of the International Trade Mart and you thought he was a pitiful figure. Yeah. You told me last week that you thought that a CIA was making contact with Oswald because he possibly had information that they might have wanted to get a hold of. Now, you also said that you never were scared of card-carrying communists. Right. And you don't think he was one. When you were sitting out there watching Oswald, did you ever get the feeling this was kind of scary? I mean, he always looked like a communist. He was out there with all this, pro-Castro. What did you think when you saw him? I frankly thought he was a nut. Like these people who come on the street and preach the Bible, Did you ever think, I'm leading you, Bob. Go ahead. I'm sorry, but did it ever enter into your mind that maybe he wasn't legit? I thought he was nuts. I never even gave him I really never thought that much of the man and his ability at all. And to have him come down as a killer to me as it was the most incredible news I've ever heard in my life. When he pops up with Junior Butler on the radio program, Junior Butler planted that. Why would he want to fool with a nut like Oswald? For publicity purposes. I think that's absolutely correct. I think Junior saw an out to use him. A lot of people had seen Lee Harvey Oswald. Everybody in the Trade Mart certainly had seen him. All of these people were people who were involved with the international affairs. And Junior Butler was involved with people who certainly international Trade Mart connections. And so it was natural if he could use a man like Lee Harvey Oswald on the radio. It would make a nice, good impression. To show him up as a communist? That's right. And sort of a kook. That's right. I don't think Junior was any friend of Lee Harvey Oswald. Now, don't get me wrong. No. What I'm getting at was you seem to not think that he was a card-carrying communist, but Junior Butler apparently did. Junior saw communists under the chair of every place. I mean, well, you can see, Mr. Gaudet, this has just been in the back of my mind all along, and I don't think but the CIA. So please don't get that. But it's conceivable to you that Oswald was down there in front of the Trade Mart doing all this to build a communist record on behalf of somebody. In other words, if there was any kind of conspiracy to kill the president and you wanted a fall guy, it sure would be nice to have somebody who had been involved in very pro-communist activities immediately before that. Like somebody standing out in front of the International Trade Mart, handing out pro-Castro pamphlets and getting on radio and television and ranting on all these Marxist doctrine. You see, in Oswald's life, there's only one very small segment that he does this. You see, what we've got him in Dallas before that, he ain't doing nothing. He ain't going to meetings, much less standing out in the middle of the street yelling all this communist stuff. But all of a sudden, he shows up in New Orleans, just like somebody stuck a fire under him. And I'm trying to wonder what his possible motivation would have been. As you say, he certainly didn't appear to be just a real sharp individual. But there must have been some reason why he was wanting to bring all this attention to himself. Possibly he was being encouraged from somewhere. That's quite possible. I don't think this plot started overnight to kill the president. I think, as a matter of fact, it started I would say within weeks after the Bay of Pigs fiasco, and it just took it that long to finally get ahead, because it had to narrow itself down to a very few individuals who actually would be willing to, if not participate, put up the money to have the act done. There were 4 Cuban gunmen running around Chicago on November 1st, 1963, when Kennedy was supposed to come there with the intent to murder him. They were Cubans. I don't have their identities, but the fact is it happened in Dallas in my mind. Just purely coincidental that they hadn't killed him in Dallas, they would have kept on until they did. And I think that Dallas had nothing to do. I mean, I thought for 11 years now that Dallas was just being has gotten this guilt complex for nothing. Could have happened in Nashville, Tennessee, or Biloxi, Mississippi, or wherever. And I think it turned out from the perpetrator's viewpoint that Dallas was a fine place because Dallas is known as the bigotry capital of the Southwest. So, it turned out to be very fortunate. I don't really think it had anything to do with Dallas. Never have thought so. Well, they have hurt Dallas quite a bit. It did hurt them, but I don't think it had anything to do with it any more than I think the CIA had anything to do with it. It just happened there. I'd like to ask about 4 different people named Gonzalez. Do you know Virgilio Gonzalez? No. Well, he was the one that was caught in the Watergate, the locksmith from Miami. Yeah. There's a man with a very similar name for the agency for 14 years by the name of Virgino, Virgino. No. Gonzalez. Don't know him. There was a man by the name of Alonzo Gonzalez from Havana. No. Who was an Episcopal priest and also the best rifle shot in Cuba? Doesn't ring a bell? Don't know him. How about Manuel Garcia Gonzalez? No. Struck out on all 4. You didn't make the Gonzalez connection. No. Go ahead. Did you ever know Orest Pena? No, not to my knowledge. What did he do? He got his passport the same day Oswald did in June. He was down there in New Orleans. How about a Marilyn Dorothea Moret? Marilyn Moret? I guess she went by Marilyn Moret. That name rings a bell. All right, let me pause real quick for a second here. So this is interesting. Orest Pena is the owner of the Havana Bar, the same place where allegedly Lee Harvey Oswald was seen throwing up wearing a clip-on bow tie with his arms slung around his husky Latino fucking friend, right? William Seymour and Lawrence Howard, duh, right? So Orest Pena was suspected of being CIA because he has an extensive travel fucking history, like extensive to like weird countries in South America and shit, right? So Orest Pena is the owner of the Havana Bar, but also he got his visa the same day in June, not the September one where they went to Mexico. In June, he got a visa. What the fuck did he get a visa in June for? I don't remember. All right, moving on. Oh, and Marilyn Moret is Oswald's first cousin through Dutz Moret. That name rings a bell somewhere. She lives in New Orleans. I don't know what she said, but the name rings a bell somewhere. She was Lee Harvey Oswald's cousin, but she apparently did work for the agency. The name rings a bell somewhere. Moret, yeah. And she may have worked for the agency in New Orleans. I don't know. They had quite a few here. This was not a small office. Don't give me the impression that the CIA had a small operation there. How large would you say it was? I would say 50 people. That would include professionals and clerks and typists, and that's right. And you reported, but just to one guy you reported. That's right. Was he the head of it? He was the head of it. How available was he when you wanted to talk with him? I simply said, this is Bill Gaudet. And they would put you through? That's right. And he's now retired. I think he is. Still in New Orleans? If he's not dead. He's not the lawyer you were talking about earlier. Yeah, he's the lawyer. He's the lawyer. You don't know who the head of it is now. The guy who succeeded him was a fellow by the name of Ray something, whose name I don't remember. And then there was another guy who was involved with them, and I went to school with, I can't remember his name for the life of me. You see, this man was so prominent in New Orleans circles. He was a member of the Boston Club, for example, which is our most exclusive club, which is the club that puts on Comas, as you know. As he comes from one of the oldest families in New Orleans, and it was so very easy for him to move around in. Sure, circles that the average Joe Joe Blow couldn't, so that I was able to have lunch with him at various places, that in view of my own connection, that no one would think anything of the fact that I was having lunch with him. They would see us together, but that was it. Did he have to give up his law practice to do this? Now that I don't know. I don't think he continued law practice. He didn't have to. He moved offices. Had enough money, he did. Sure. Not have to, actually. I think the money that he got from the CIA was really without any meaning to him, because I think the year that he joined the CIA, his daughter was the debutante of the year. It came out. So you don't have to put a child as debutante on the CIA's salary. No, sir. And do you suppose he knew Oswald? I'm quite sure he either knew or the agency knew Lee Harvey Oswald. I'm convinced the agency knew Lee Harvey Oswald. Well, wouldn't the local office here be in touch with him when he moved over here to Dallas? I'm sure the local office of the CIA with the local operatives that they had must have contacted Lee Harvey Oswald. So, who was that man who connected them in Dallas? Who is the CIA man who connected Oswald to people in Dallas when he got there? I'm pretty sure it was J. Walton Moore, if I'm not mistaken. So, I always mix up the fucking CIA FBI contact in Dallas with the guy with the FBI guy who processed the fucking crime scene stuff in the book depository, because he had a J initial in front of his name also. Let me fucking just make sure. J. Walton. Fuck it. Let me see. I think it was J. Walton Moore. So, not the professionals like you, but the locals of these 50 people. These are employees that I would call them. Right. Not of the specialty group, you see. You got to divide your CIA up. You can't just say CIA and let it go for that. Right. Because on the one hand, you had your straight employee who either worked by the hour or by the month, and you had your higher echelon groups, which is your department heads, and above them came men like I worked with. So who was in charge of the overall operations? And, for example, when I went up to meet with the CIA in Washington, he's the man who made all the arrangements for the CIA to meet me in Washington. And a group of their heads of various divisions met with me in Washington for simply a roundtable discussion of the overall picture in Latin America. As I saw it at that time, it was more of a review than a specific report, just to get themselves pretty well brought up to date on everything. But they wanted to know, and this is what this meeting was all about. And that's one of the few instances, for example, that they actually paid out any money. They paid all of my expenses up to Washington and back, and my stay in Washington. I stayed in a small room at the Willard Hotel, which was at my request because I was still a member of the National Press Club, and so I could walk across the street. It's closed up now. It is? Yeah, well, too bad. It was a great hotel. Well, I hope the National Press Club hasn't closed up. No, sir. I was there a week ago. It is, I'd say that. Do we still have the members bar? Yes, sir. Sure do. I would say that if the CIA had 50 people in its local office here, they had as many as the FBI in their local office. I don't know. That would just be a guess. I'd say they had a larger office than the FBI. Larger than the FBI. Right. But bear in mind, they covered a much larger area than the FBI. Oh, I understand. I was just thinking of the number of people. That's right. And they were doing a lot, you see. Every time, for example, I guess right below Bill, he had maybe 3 persons who were almost up to him in level. Who had various contacts. And so whenever they would have a meeting with these contacts, like Bill would have a meeting with me, he would need a secretary to take all the notes down. Right. To transmit by telex to teletype to the Washington offices. You see, they had a closed circuit from Washington to New Orleans, and they would send their reports up in turn. Washington would send reports down on things that Washington wanted, and Washington report was usually quite heavy as to their demands and what they wanted. And this would be divided according to whose territory it was. See, when it involved Bill's territory and me, why then Bill would meet with me and go over with me the list of questions, and if it required my going down there, why he'd ask me when I was going, and if I wasn't going in the immediate future, why they would be willing to absorb the additional costs involved of going immediately. Otherwise, they would not absorb any costs because there weren't any. And did you go to his office frequently? I never went to his office. You never went to his office? No, sir. You would meet him at the club, or that's right, or he'd meet me at my offices. Is there any particular reason why not? I'm just curious. I knew where his office was, yeah. No, it would just seem to be more secure to meet there than it would be meet someplace else. I think that they just didn't want to have anyone else see me go into his office. That would be my theory on why they put it up that way. They wanted to protect my cover as much as I wanted to be protected, because bear in mind, in that very, very vulnerable position, if I got out into international circles that I was reporting to the CIA, you can well understand, with all the turmoil going on in Latin America and my frequent traveling, the chances are I would not be in this front porch talking to you today. And I certainly know that I could never have gotten out of Guatemala. But I couldn't have gotten out of El Salvador, as a matter of fact, on a couple of occasions. But that's all past history. You were telling me that I was interested in about something that you said that you figured out the agency people were in contact with Oswald. Okay, now you call them and tell them that the FBI wants to talk to you about this trip and about this Oswald. Weren't you ever questioned by the people here if you knew Oswald? Oh, you mean CIA? Yeah. No, because they knew I wasn't. They knew even though the FBI was talking to you. There was no need to question me at all about it. Well, I mean, just by the chance that you might have. They would. Look, if they would question me about the Oswald thing, then they wouldn't want me any longer as an agent. Well, I meant that you might just be in contact with him like they were. Well, if they asked me about anything Oswald, they probably asked me offhand did I see him do anything or something that might be of interest to them. But as to whether I had any contact with him or not, obviously, they wouldn't be interested in that, because if they felt that I was connected with Oswald in any way, shape, or form, then they would be questioning my own integrity to work for them. No, I didn't mean to imply that. No, but I'm telling you, this is the way they would be taking, or, in other words, you can't have a man in whom you are placing a lot of trust and on whom you are basing a lot of judgments and then turn around and question him about something like this. What about the Riley Coffee Company? Did you ever know many people over there? I knew the head of it, yes. You did. Was it your understanding that, I didn't know some ex-government people worked over there? Agents? To my knowledge, no, but that agent would not be surprising, because Brazil was a very important source of coffee for the Riley Coffee Company. And they had a lot of contacts in Brazil, and I'm sure they must have used their men, and like they had a lot, I think the same would apply to Sam Israel and Company, which had a lot of contacts in Brazil and Colombia. Did the man that you knew at Riley, did he ever do any agency work? I doubt it. He was the president. Wouldn't have any reason to. I thought that's maybe where you knew him. No, that was the only one I knew was the president. And I knew him through his father-in-law, who was the president. Did you ever know a man named George de Mohrenschildt? Who? George de Mohrenschildt. Don't know him at all. How about Kerry Thornley? Kerry Thornley. No. Did you ever know the two men who disappeared over either Central or South America in September of '63? Jeffrey Sullivan and Alexander Rourke. Alexander Rourke is a name that pops up big time when you start to dig into Lester Logue and you dig into General Walker and Jerry Hemming and that whole fucking crew. CIA for sure, 100%. Gaudet, no. Familiar with that? I remember the story briefly. What about the name Igor Vaganov? Remember, Igor Vaganov is the guy who provided the red Ford Falcon to Kerry Thornley when he escapes the Texas Theater. Gaudet, no. That's an interesting story, huh? There's an interesting story connected with him, but it would take me 30 minutes to tell it, and, well, it's got nothing to do with this. Gaudet says, are you going to see Kerr while you're over here? I thought we would. Where would we find him? We'll see if he's at home. And Gaudet picks up a phone. I'm not that stupid that I would have gotten a Mexican tourist card if I had gone to Meridia. Well, that's the only thing that makes me think that his memory is better than it. This is stated here. It must have been misunderstood me. He must have misunderstood me, and I don't think he would purposely make that statement, because there would be no reason to say that. But by the same token, there would be no reason for me to get a Mexican tourist card if I'm only going to, if I'm traveling on, because anyone who travels knows that if you're an ongoing passenger, you don't need anything to land in a country to just go on. And now, even in the case of an emergency, if something happens to the plane, you're allowed to stay there with the responsibility of the company until it's repaired and you move on. So in an emergency, I guess you can get one when you land anyway. That's right, you can. I've come down on occasion. So that's what tends me to believe that I was right in my first evaluation, that I went to Mexico City first, and the only reason I didn't have a Mexican visa was because Mexico was very ticklish on this tourist visa business as compared to the other countries, and I always traveled tourist because it is the exit that causes you so much trouble. You know, if you're going on a business visa in a lot of these places, you've got to get your tax business cleared up and everything else before you can leave. So it's, if you are there only for a day or so to get processed, that's why you got a tourist visa. Right. And in my newspaper classification, they didn't bother. You weren't taking any money out. No, I was bringing money in. That's right. And so, I wish McCord luck in helping the CIA, because I think it's about time that the truth be known that the CIA is not the terrible menace that a lot of people seem to think it is, because frankly, I don't know what to God we could do without this country without it. Well, if, as is possible, the CIA is in effect abolished, they're going to have to turn the functions back to the military, and that doesn't cheer up to make a great deal. They can't handle it. I had to work with the military during the war years, which was G2, and I'm telling you, their intelligence was absolutely zero in importance. Now, the Navy had much better intelligence. The Navy's intelligence was a top grade, frankly, every time I bumped into, because I think in the war years, for example, I used to make these overseas calls out of Panama to my office in Washington, and despite the fact that I'd given umpteen number of clearances, the Navy insisted I go over and do it again before they would even allow my call to go through. No matter what, and before they would even put your call through, and then they'd call you back, and they kept a monitor on you while you were talking. And so I hope you can understand that from anybody concerned about this, how important it is you know that the truth come out. Well, I'm concerned over what you showed me in the Warren Commission report. Well, you see, this is the problem. This is one of many problems. I would appreciate a call from you if the FBI does come, and if they try to put heat on you. You know what I'm talking about. Gaudet says, well, I tell you, I know exactly what I'm going to do in the event the FBI tries to apply heat to me. I still have a few contacts in the CIA. I'm not completely cut off. And I certainly will be right in touch with the CIA immediately. And the FBI will know about it. And so my paper is doing a story about me simply in self-defense of me. Because ever since this New Times has come out, I've been subject to some personal criticism over here, that I was part of the murder gang, which the CIA is supposed to be. We believe in murdering little children and other things and so forth. Now, I don't know who spread all this horrible gossip about the CIA, but it's a very ugly word today. Have you been getting phone calls from other journalists? One from the East, or a guy named Hudkins, was it? No, I think it was the New York Post. It is. I think it's the New York Post. But that's all. That's all now. Could we get a copy of that story when it's published? You mean mine? Yes, just to write to the paper. Yeah, they're going to write a story more in defense of me than anything else. I'd just like to see it, since we were very interested on the subject. And, well, where is your address? In Washington? Mine's in Washington, yeah. Yeah, all right, I'll see and I'll get you a copy. Fensterwald says I'd appreciate it, or we can write, if it's going to be trouble, we can just write to the paper. No, I can get it without trouble. Then something happened to the tape and it flips. Fensterwald says, since 47, nobody ever really found any need to do any of this type of stuff. Don't you think it's a new experience for me? Yes. How do you think Mr. Colby's holding up there? I don't know, frankly. He must have a sweat. And then it says, well, Mr. Helms is just stonewalling it. Well, he's the kind who wouldn't let it worry him, I don't think. Only once, and that was the other day. He lost his cool after about a 3-hour session with Rockefeller Commission. He came out cussing and swearing. Yes. Of course, nobody really knows what that's all about. Well, you've been very kind to put up with us for all this length of time, and I think we ought to let you get back to whatever you were doing. And Mr. Gaudet says, well, I'm going to get dressed and go into town. And that is the end of this interview with Mr. William Gaudet. I think it's pretty obvious he fucking is a victim of selective memory. He's only giving them part of the story. He was obviously, if not directly in contact with Oswald, he was obviously an observational handler, right? He was told to keep an eye on the guy. He was literally, when in another interview I've read of him, he saw Oswald directly out of his fucking window from where his office was. Like, he could see him before he went to the Trade Mart, because he ended up moving from a building not in the Trade Mart to the Trade Mart. So, yeah, good stuff, interesting stuff. It's another piece of the puzzle, and we'll return to Gaudet at some point in time. But for the time being, that's it for Gaudet. I don't know what we're going to do tomorrow, but it's going to do something with New Orleans. And I think that's going to do it for me. And I'll see you guys tomorrow.